Okay, hi everybody. Welcome to this, let's call it a webinar, which relates to the new piece, crystalline work, which is previewing right now on Feral File, and is looking beautiful, and we're really happy with it. And what I wanted to do today was to give talk about the piece, to contextualize the piece for you all. And furthermore, well, really, actually, I'm going to start kind of at the start and give some of my history, going all the way back to 1994, try and sketch, how I got to this place of working in this particular kind of way. And then I am going to talk about my entry point into working online with digital art that has been, let's say, tokenized. And then I'm going to finally I'm going to share my screen with Keynote. And then I'm going to jump out of Keynote online to the Feral File website and describe the mechanism that presents crystalline work, which is currently previewing and showing artist proofs. So 1 minute, I'm getting a little alert here. Yeah. So I'm just going to share my screen and start, basically, because I can't seem to work out how to get the chat to work. Just put any comments into the questions and answers, please. So, and I'll keep that open so I can keep an eye on it. Once again, this is my first webinar. Okay, here we go. Just step by step. I'm going to do that. Let me share this. Let's play. So everybody should be able to see my screen at this point. Yeah. Yeah, I think so. If you can't see my screen, just put it in the question and answer, please. So my little background to this presentation is going to start in 1994, and I'm going to go to the present time. It's going to take around about 25 minutes, I think. And then I'm going to talk about crystalline work. So really starting at the start in 1994, I was born in Ireland, grew up in Tipperary in Ireland. And at age 20, I took off from Ireland, and I attended a beautiful art school in Oxford, part of Oxford University, which is called the Ruskin. And one of the interesting things about that moment in time, which is 1994, is that this is the year that Netscape Navigator was released. And so I got into a computer science lab in 1994 and suddenly got on the web. So just like my brain was kind of networked at that time. And one of the very earliest things that I found at that time was this idea of 3D scanning, which really interested me, this idea of the image, which could be sculptural. And I wrote to a company outside Oxford called Wicks and Wilson and asked them if I could make a 3D scan of a friend, actually of my sister Esther's, called Mary. And so here's a 3D scan at that time. This is actually one a little bit later. And I really thought about this as an image object, a photograph which could be turned in space. So it starts to challenge divisions between sculpture and photography. But in retrospect, it's also a data object, which I think is interesting and important. It's made up of a polygonal mesh. It's not made up of pixels as such. It's made up of polygons. And again, this idea of the three-dimensional image object emerged at that time, 95, maybe something like that. So the other thing that was happening, I was a kid, like 18, 17. I was a real kind of acid house kind of kid. I wasn't really involved. It was more about like, acid house, smiley faces and dungarees as a fashion thing. But when I got to the UK, my friends and I would drive up to places like the Hacienda, and we would, go raving in these places like the Hacienda. And, at that point, a lot of music was coming from Chicago, a lot of music was coming from Detroit. And you had this kind of cultural revolution unfolding, in real time, where drugs like MDMA were hitting this particular type of, let's call it electronic music. And, it was a potent cultural force. It was really potent at that time. And I, one of the most interesting kind of records that I've seen of that time is Mark Lecky's Fiorucci Made Me Hardcore. I'm just going to actually, you know what? I've just realized something. I'm going to stop sharing. I have to share with sound. 1 second. 1 second. I have to go here, share my screen. I have to share sound, share. So I'm going to press play again. Oops. So yeah, so one of the most interesting records of that time is Mark Lecky's film Fiorucci Made Me Hardcore. It's available on YouTube if you want to see it. It's great, and it kind of so, but the reason I mentioned the hacienda is because I stood on the side of the dance floor in the hacienda and asked the question, you know, if computing does this, if electronic, you know, technologies do this to music, what's it going to do to art? So I made a commitment to computing at that time, maybe 1995, which I'm still pursuing now, basically. So moving forward, you know, 2001, I leave BFA in the Ruskin. I do MFA in Chicago. Then I do an MSc Computer Science in Dublin. And I start moving into the game engine. Basically, I meet a bunch of programmers and they're like going to the game engine. Game engine, very, very quick sketch, comes out of military simulations, military battle sims. This is 1964. There's 1976, you know, into kind of like hyper-realistic game engine, you know, kind of battle, entertainment battle spaces, basically. And game engines are interesting on many, many levels, but it's a form of world making, I would say, absolutely fundamentally. This is a little list of just some of the elements of world making, which I find interesting, which I'm not going to go into too much detail. A very, very early work from that time was Thousand Year Dawn Marcel from 2005, in which a young man is watching the sun rise in the scene, but there's been a sort of a glitch in the system, and the sun will take 1,000 years to rise. Now, these are all exe software-based works, and they're rendered locally on PCs, and I'm going to really keep talking about that as I go on. This particular work was brought to Miami in 2005, and it was installed in an art fair there and sold, which kind of freed me up to kind of go into the world and make smoke trees, 2006 through 2007. These are trees that are, instead of making smoke, they are making, instead of making leaves, they're making smoke, basically. Yeah, a number of different smoke trees here, which you can see variations on that theme. They were installed, this is the Royal Hibernian Academy in Dublin, that's a solo show. But here's a younger me demonstrating how these things were installed at that time. It's basically 2006, this is in, I think, in Art Basel in Switzerland. And you have a box made from corian. There's a central turn sensor, which allows you to look around these as virtual sculptures, editions of 6. And they were placed in the world by a gallery I worked with at that time, called Ernst Hilger, basically. So these are all deep, deep, deep back histories about working in game engines, working with ecology, subjects of ecology, and these kinds of things. 2007, you know, selling and, you know, in a way, placing works in private collections allowed me to raise some, I would call it power more than money, because I think artists need to think about capital less in terms of, let's say, personal dynamics and more in terms of, well, ideally less in terms of personal dynamics. Sometimes you can't get away from that, but in terms of being able to use those kind of resources to do other things. So I was able to use the kind of like the energies that emerged from placing those works to invest in a piece called Dust Storm in 2007, which related to the epicenter of the American Dust Bowl, which was called, which was known colloquially as Black Sunday, which was a very, very severe dust storm that stripped the topsoil of really millions of acres of the American Midwest and destroyed landscapes, basically, in the middle of the Dust Bowl in America. Really, the Dust Bowl relates to this image, which is a really important image for me, which is the first big oil strike in 1902. This is the Lucas Gusher and Spindletop, Texas, which is the birth of the oil century, which you could also describe as the birth of like American modernism in a funny sort of way. I mean, American modernism also reaches back into the 19th century with the big industrial powers, but the oil age, which really transformed the earth in many, many very specific ways, began in this site at this time. That's 1902 in Spindletop, Texas. That's 1903. So that's still 1902. You get a sense of the expansion of the sort of energies at that time. So oil quickly transformed agriculture, but agriculture destroyed the landscape, destroyed the grass cover, and 100 million acres of the American Midwest were destroyed between between the origins of petrol agriculture, let's say 1910s, 1915s, 1920s, and 1935, when you had the Dust Bowl, you had like these epic sort of destruction. So an early work, 07, looked at that. This is a sketch of concept. This is a simulation that I made, which I'm just going to touch on, which remade the storm as a sort of as a virtual sculpture, placed it on the landscape as it is now. And then a big break for me, it was shown in Marion Goodman Gallery in New York in 07 in a show called Equal That Is to the Real Itself, which you can see here, curated by Linda Norden. That dust storm and a number of other works traveled to Venice in 09, which you can see here. I'm actually going to skip over this because I'm spending a bit too long on some of these subjects. This was a beautiful installation commissioned by the Public Art Fund in New York called Solar Reserve. Actually, I'll talk about it briefly. A portrait of a solar generating plant, which has now been dismantled, very, very weirdly, which was a solar generating tower to make renewable energy in Nevada. We installed that piece as a simulation on a major LED wall at the Lincoln Center in New York, which you can see here. Now, this record, my virtual portrait of that scene, that power generating scene, is now the only record of this object because it's been dismantled and thrown away, which you can see this piece installed here at the Lincoln Center, now in collection of MoMA. So let me just think here for a moment. Those are Instagrams from that time. Yeah, I just want to think in real time here. So I want to now talk about three flags, basically. I'm going to jump around a little bit. I think this presentation is too long now that I look at it and I see how quickly time is going by. So fundamentally, what we're talking about here are pieces of software, game engine-based works that are executable files, basically. So this is Western Flag from 2017. It was commissioned by Channel 4. It is a smoke flag for what's called the carbon legacy, which is all the carbon dioxide left behind from the first big strike, the 1902 strike in Spindletop. I recalled it with this flag. That's 17. A couple of years later, and I'm just jumping here a little bit because I think I put too much in, I produced a piece called Flare, which is a alarm for the burning ocean, which emerged from a very interesting conversation with a activist from Tonga called Ulilusi. And this is basically announcing that the oceans are burning, which is what he said to me at a climate change conference in Madrid in 2019. And finally, the last of these major major works, which led from a conversation with Bono from U2, is called Surrender Flag. Bono and I talked about what does it mean to surrender. And does it mean to stop? Does it mean to fail? Does it mean to retreat, etc.? This is the name of Bono's autobiography, which is called Surrender. And I thought about this idea, which was commissioned by a wonderful patron in London called Catherine Walsh, to make a white water vapor flag, which would be a surrender flag for, let's say, modern society, basically. So that's the site outside Nevada. This is the Surrender Flag, which is a simulation, a virtual world, which is built in the game engine, showing a cloud-like water vapor flag. It was beautifully installed at the Hayward on a big LED wall as public art, which is something I'm going to talk about in more detail later. And it also traveled to the Sphere for the U2 residency in the Sphere, which you can see here. You can see Flair as part of that residency. I let this run for one moment because this was quite a beautiful moment for Surrender Flag as public art in the Sphere with U2. So what I want to say is that, like, I came up as a young artist, you know, age 20, getting on the internet, finding, scanning, you know, this idea of the image object, let's say the data object, and I bring it into the game engine. And then I survive and I thrive making, you know, sculptures, virtual sculptures, and presenting them in the world, 06 through to, let's say, 19. So something very interesting happened in 2019. I would call it young blockchain. Casey Rias, who I had met in Ars Electronica in Linz, where I had done a residency trying to make early works in the game engine, was a young artist coming out of the MIT Media Lab at that time. 2019, he reached out and he said, John, I'm doing this project called A2P. Now, A2P is really, really interesting. And just Google A2P and Rias and you'll get it. And in it, Casey reached out to people and he said, I want to do an experiment in artist-to-artist collecting. Now, unbeknownst to me, behind A2P was Sean, who's the founder of Bitmark, which is a blockchain, and Casey, who's a good friend of Sean's. So these works, which were being swapped between this very interesting group of artists. So we have, you know, in no particular order, we've got Zach Lieberman here. We have Kim Asendorf here, who's an incredible artist. We have, you know, just a bunch of, like, you know, La Turbo Avedon, like Jennifer Steinkampf, Uber Morgan here in Vienna are amazing. Mark Tribe, you know, this is like this amazing group of artists that have been invited in 2019 by Casey. Aurea Harvey, who's just had an incredible show in the New York Museum of the Moving Image and just incredible review in the New York Times. Like, this is like really just early blockchain kind of stuff. And I was invited and I put a piece called Gas of Water up as a JPEG, not really knowing what I was doing. And, you know, I swapped works with Leah and with Mark Tribe and Uber Morgan. And, you know, I own these works. They're kind of tokenized. They're images that are tokenized. So this is 19, okay, which is interesting. And I don't really know what's going on. Boom, 2021, you know, the everyday thing happened, which just kind of, I call it the bomb. Like, it really was like, it kind of went off like a bomb. It just was, you know, the idea of a digital deed, the token, the so-called non-fungible token, or the NFT. It is a non-fungible token, but, you know, shortened to NFT. That it would value a digital thing, that digital thing might have that value, you know. Even now, it's hard to recall what a shock that was for the world. It just was like an explosion, you know. And you know, I wouldn't say I'd say we, you know, in a way, like the community, like people who've been sort of making digital art for a long time. I think there was a certain offense taken because everything was, there was a lot of discussion globally about the transaction, the scale of the transaction, and you know, the money, just in the most simplest terms. And I released a response, my own private, personal little response that, you know, nobody paid much attention to, But I took a little snippet, 30-second snippet out of my piece, Western Flag, which is a simulation. And I made my one and only video piece, which I have ever made and will ever make, which is called Western Flag NFT. It's a little beautiful 30-second perfectly looping video. Minted it on Foundation, and that's now in the collection of the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. And actually, it is the first tokenized artwork in the collection of Black Mass. So that was my kind of like little thing that I did for myself. So that's like just like a week after Every Days. Like I kind of went wild. I did this. Went mad, and I did this. You know, that was my response. So, you know, not long afterwards, you know, we'd been making these things called flags for some years, where I worked with an incredible programmer called Helmut Bressler and an incredible producer, Werner Putzelberger. We'd been looking at an algorithm to do with iridescence, like gasoline on water iridescence. And so these are these pieces called flags, which you could acquire an edition of 12. You know, these are local, geographic, place-based XCs, as you can see here. And post joining Pace Gallery, a wonderful global gallery, which I currently work with, the producer of the work, who is Werner Putzelberger, said, Johnny, we really need to look at WebGL. So Ariel Hoods, who runs Pace Verso, reached out and said, we're working with Art Blocks. Do you have anything for us? And I had this thing, Petronational, which I'm not going to talk about too much, but it's 196 countries in the shape of those countries, and the petrol spills that you see here relate to the amount of gasoline that each country is consuming. This is America, one of the most heavily consuming petrol countries on Earth, which has a very lustrous shine. So that was released. When was that released? That was 21st of June, 2022. Happily, it went into the world, also to some beautiful museums like the Pompidou, in some very good company. Doesn't need any introduction. And sometime later, I made a piece called Smoke Hands for File as well on Tezos, which is a very simple work, but work I really like very much. And that is also in the Pompidou collection, which is nice. And last reference, just entry point before we get to Crystalline, is World Flag was the next year, responding to the flags of the world. Now, I want to talk briefly about World Flags because I've been at many climate change conferences. I've seen a lot of gathering. I've seen a lot of, you know, people discussing, you know, how to tackle climate change within the national framework. And I would say, you know, things are not progressing in a very orderly way or in a very optimistic way. So the World Flags were sort of about this idea of gathering within these settings, you know, the world, you know, United Nations setting, talking about climate change, going home and not much changing. And I suppose Surrender Flag a little bit says, like, are we willing to ask the question, what can we give up, you know, to address climate change? So, which brings me to Crystalline work. So we have about, we're 30 minutes in. I'm going to speak for another 10, 15 minutes. I want to give time for people to ask questions. I really hope I can manage this webinar and, like, I don't know, let people speak, but anyway, or ask questions or whatever. So Crystalline work. Art Blocks is a very austere setting. It's basically about code becoming art, let's just say. Now, we here work within game engines fundamentally. So, you know, we use quite a lot of libraries and we're looking for a certain amount of richness. So I had begun Crystalline work many, many, many years ago, like really with a JavaScript-based snowflake generator, which I found online probably about 2005, which allowed you to make snowflakes, like, you know, on the internet, which I loved. And 2019, we made a piece which was called Crystalline Work, you know, at that time, you can see it's quite different. It was an XE. It was nobody ever collected it, but it's present in the world as an XE. We've actually renamed this piece now to be a sort of a study. And in the place of the prismatic robot, we have a monochromatic robot here, which actually moves slightly slower, et cetera, et cetera. It's quite a different piece, but you can kind of see the similarities between the two works, between crystalline work and this. So that's a little back history going back to late 1819 on crystalline. And I kind of really wanted to get crystalline into WebGL, onto the web, and to approach it slightly differently. So I wrote to KC Rias, heroic and beloved founder of processing 20 years ago, esteemed artist, esteemed teacher, esteemed thinker in his own right. And KC, who is effectively the curator of Feral File, said, I really love this piece, let's do it. So Feral File, we're like, let's do it. So now, what is crystalline work? So it was originally an XE, which is a piece in which a robot uses an ice generation algorithm to make patterns. That's what it was. Like, that's what this was. It's in a box. The box is in a gallery in a museum. It's local, I would say. And it simply makes patterns and you can look at it. It's art. That's what it is. Yeah. Now, what is crystalline now? This is really quite a big deal for me. So it's still something quite similar. You have a robot, but the robot is not prismatic, and I will talk about that in a moment. And the robot is no longer local. It's no longer sited in any place. It is a new place. It's in this place, wherever I am right now, which is a new place, a network place, a prismatic place, I'm just going to say. And by prismatic, what I mean by that is like, we are in a way neurally networked right now, literally, using most likely fiber optic cables. I mean, there's a little bit of satellite or whatever, but a lot of the data on Earth is being transmitted on fiber optic cables. And I'm really interested in fiber optic cables because data is transmitted as light. It's mostly encoded in the ultraviolet and the infrared like parts, but light data is something I'm sort of really interested in. And I think about this generation who are now, let's say 20, who've come up on these platforms where they have been communicating like this, their whole lives. I think of them as a very prismatic generation, which I'm sort of interested in, in a number of different ways. So crystalline work used to be offline. It's now online. It used to be an XE. It's now a WebGL work, web graphics language, basically. Web graphics language is a beautiful vessel to put rich worlds on the internet. It is, to summarize it, it is a mechanism by which virtual worlds can be rendered in the browser, okay? And it is an absolute blessing and a kind of a boom for me because I get to work in the browser as an artist committed to public art. I get to speak to a public which is no longer limited by geography. So there's no limits. Because for me, I believe that if you can go full screen on your laptop and experience my work, I don't differentiate so enormously than if you walk to a museum. I mean, museums have their role and their beauty and their purpose. But if I, as an artist, was to nominate one thing that I seek, it would be to move the public. And that's an interesting and rich word. To move means physically, to physically move one, to do something, but emotionally to move. It's a kind of double word, moving, to move you emotionally, to move you physically. So my work at all times strives to move the public. That's my great ambition, is to move the public. And I believe that if you move the public through the browser, it's not so different than moving the public through an enormous LED on the street, or perhaps on an LED or whatever in MoMA. I mean, it's not so different for me. And the beautiful thing about tokenization, which already Casey was researching and intuiting in a funny way in 2019, and people kind of landed in this explosive way in 2021, is that tokenization gave us digital artists a mechanism to value our work. And I just want to say that if we can value our work, we can make time for it. This is really, really, really key. If the work is valued, we get time to work. Full stop. Nothing else. Value and work go hand in hand. I could not commit the time that crystalline work has taken, and it has been really, really laborious to make this piece. What you are seeing on File, I put my hand up, and I hope I'm not being immodest, is a really big artwork, like a really seriously big artwork. Without tokenization, it would not exist. Forget it. So I'm going to jump to the website in a second and talk about it. But so here we have crystalline work now in a WebGL world, and it's here. It's on the browser. Okay. So I'm not going to do that. I'm going to change my mind. I'm changing my mind. I'm stopping sharing. I'm going to take Keynote down, and I'm going to share the browser. Share screen. Share this. Good. Yeah. So here we go. Now, if there is anything going on, just tell me, but I'm going to just try and go full screen here. So if I click full screen, can you guys still see that? Yes, actually, I can't see. You know what? I'll just do it like this. It's fine. I'm going to click top left-hand corner and exit full screen. Whoops. Second, I'm just going to do this. Okay, so what is crystalline work? Crystalline work is a robot that is sited in the North Pole, a fictitious kind of North Pole, let's say a hot North Pole. It's basically a North Pole, that's kind of a platform which on which there is no ice. So it's a sort of like a North Pole on which there's no ice. We call this top window the generator, or sometimes we call it the mother. It depends on the day. And this is a rich virtual world. So if I click here, I can look around. See, I can look around here. Okay. If I click top left-hand corner, I can go full screen. If I click bottom right-hand corner, nothing happens here. Top right-hand corner, I can switch on rotate. So the camera rotates. And very importantly, bottom left-hand corner, I can switch on sound. But I'm going to talk about sound later. Sound is a really big generative sound, one of the very first times I've ever worked with sound. So here you have a robot making the AP. I call this year 0 of artist proof year. At the top of this window, and it takes 20 minutes, an hour and a half, 2 hours. Depends on how many crystals there are being made. When the work is done, it drops down into what we call like the child window, which is underneath or to the side. We're still working on the design here, basically. And when a new work is done, it will drop a new work to the child window, basically. And it'll push that work, which is, it's going to load now. It's also WebGL work. It's going to push that work down into this gallery, basically. So fundamentally, what you have here is this, again, I'm going to use that word, a cultural vessel. Top left-hand corner, you can rotate the work. Top left-hand corner, you can go full screen if you click on your phone or on your laptop. Bottom left-hand corner, you can switch on a annual vibrational audio soundtrack. And the bottom right-hand corner, which I will do here, allows you to switch the robot on or off in the child. The child is the NFT of the generator, basically. The generator is still working away here, basically. The child drifts out of play and the robot comes back in and does the work, okay? So we are currently making artist proofs here, which means that we began on, we're doing 12 days of artist proofs. And those artist proofs have a function that they would reveal one day from the 12 months of the year. So this first one here is the 1st of June, let's say, which is basically actually it's the 20th of June, because this is the day, oh no, sorry, it's July. It's July. This is July. So here, I'm just going to hit this so you get to see the robot that functions here. Let me just do it. It takes a minute. So I'm going to clear this work and let you see this robot. So the robot is going to come in the NFT, in the work, and remake this pattern, and it will continue to do that until you tell it to stop. The alternative is if you don't tell the robot to do anything, you simply have the pattern, okay? So I'm going to just check the color of this robot. Now, I call the robot prismatic because its color, as you can see here, is changing at every minute of the year. So in the generator, this robot's color is, I call it unstable, which means that it is shifting, like data is always flowing and always shifting. So from the summer solstice, June 20th, all the way through, then I'm going to answer that in a minute. I'll answer that at the end. One second, I just have to catch my thread of thought again. So beginning on the summer solstice, we have a robot which is silver with no color because it's outside the prism. And then across the year, you get the prism, basically red all the way through to blue. So that is July. And I'm going to go to winter when it should be bluish. 1 second. Just takes a minute to load. So while it is loading, I'm just going to look at the generator here. So again, the generator is making new works, and those works, part of the APs, are dropping down into this gallery below, basically. So let me just do this here. So as I'm waiting for all these things to load up, I just want to say that I want to talk about the sound. I think the sound's quite important. Why are these things? They're a little bit, these things are stopping working here. I've been working with a young composer here called Jonas Hederer, and we have worked to make what I call an annual solar soundtrack, a generative audio soundtrack. So I'm going to just demo it here and talk about it a little bit, basically. So if I click here, come up, and I'm going to talk about it. So what I was interested here was to respond to the idea of the sound bath or the electronic choir, and I'm going to do rotation. Yeah. So almost the idea of the Tibetan bow, so if you spend time with this work, simply compose, you've got like a generative audio track which accompanies this work across almost a little bit like a sound. So when the sound is on, People can't hear me, so I'm going to switch the sound off. Experience the sound for yourself. So what I was saying was that the sound is a generative annual audio which unfolds across the year accompanying this work. So before I open this up to questions and answer Dan's questions and all of your questions, I just wanted to say as follows. This work opens to collect on June 18th at 6 o'clock UTC +2. Now that is the moment of the summer solstice, okay? So at that point, the AP is completely filled. There has been 24 works, 1 per day across the year. So none of these are available. These are just samples for you to work out what things are. And actually, really, there's a lot more to say about this because the logic of this piece involves like a ray structure, which comes from the construction of crystals. You can choose the piece by season, for instance, by winter and summer here. You can choose it by the number of crystals, et cetera, et cetera. You can choose the piece by the robot color. If you choose mirrored, which is the very beautiful, very rare one that you only get in the solstice. There's lots of different ways you can choose these pieces. I haven't actually touched on archetypes, which is these kind of signs and symbols that come out of the algorithm, the ice generation algorithm itself. I think I spent a bit too much time on the prehistory now that I'm actually getting into this piece. So sorry about that. So these are these archetypes which emerge from the ice generation algorithm, basically, in the work. Here you have the different types of vibrational sound, which are coming up different levels. And you can also map a sort of unique, let's say, we have our own calendar system in the work. You can map the Gregorian calendar onto that piece, basically, if you wish, by choosing these sorts of things here, basically. Come to think of it, now that I'm really talking about this piece, I could devote an entire lecture just to explaining the piece itself because it's very, very complicated. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I'm going to come back to this interface and I'm going to try and answer some questions. And yeah, like, as I said, this is kind of a new space for me. So I'm wondering, can people actually speak? If anybody is familiar with like webinars, just shout and tell me if I can actually, if I can open this up a little bit, because it seems extremely closed at the moment. Okay, somebody raised a hand. 1 second. So, okay, so the best thing to do is just to put the question into the question. Okay, Diane, do you know how I open this up so people can ask questions? Can you put it into the, answer live. Can I answer this live? No. Dan, can anybody put into the question and answer how I can is there, 1 second, let me just see if I can do this. I just want to see if I can. Okay, just put questions into the use the Q&A. Okay, yeah, just use the Q&A, guys. So put in a okay, put a question to Q&A and I'll answer. Okay. So the first question from Dan is, it seems like a very sophisticated work. I wonder how heavy is the final file stored on IPFS. I'm going to double check that with the producer Werner, who's on this call, and he's going to come in and tell me now. Okay. So any people who raise their hands, could you possibly put the questions into the Q&A and I can try and answer them? So Chris Coleman asks, can you better explain how people will collect the works? Do you wait until the day we want occurs and try to buy it, or are they randomly assigned? Okay, that is a very good question. So the way the sale is currently constructed for tomorrow is that it opens at the time of the sale, which has been described. And actually, Lauren, will you just put into the chat the exact time of the sale in let's say in LA and New York time, so I can announce it. When the sale opens, it is the next available work. So on the solstice, which is when you have these beautiful silver robots, and I will actually, while I'm talking, I will play a beautiful silver robot just so that you guys can see it. Actually, I'm not going to do that. When it starts, the next available work is available. Okay. Now, every day you have 24 works available. The robot is making 24 works a day. Now, they're not an hour long. One will take like 10 minutes. The other will take 3 hours. So they're different times. So it's available at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. Eastern time, just to say that's when this sale starts. The robot, basically AP is finished. The minute the sale starts, the AP is finished. APs drop out of play. They're only a reference so that you can tell how this piece is going to work across the year. So if you want, like maybe the solstice pieces, you buy some work straight away, and they're $100 each. There's a discount of like if you get 2, you get 2%, up to 24% if you get 24 works. 24 works is 24 hours. It's a day basically, and we've developed this thing where you can string them together. Now, Chris, so just to be clear, if you acquire 24 works, you will get 24 works, but you have to wait until they're performed. They will be performed by the robot, and then as they're performed, they will drop into your wallet. Before that, there is a kind of a placeholder in your wallet, a little icon, a little JPEG in your wallet. Okay, so let's say we open and we have a bunch of people who buy a month. The people who buy immediately will get the works within a couple of hours or a couple of days. The people who buy a little bit later will get the works in a month when they're performed. Just to be clear, the robot performs for a year. It performs from summer solstice this year to summer solstice next year. So it performs across the year. And obviously 24-hour daylight in the summer in the Arctic, and 24-hour daylight night in the winter. So you've got these different kind of light conditions. So you acquire the works and then you have to wait, Chris, just to answer. So conditions. Can the robot respond to people's voices? No. The robot is autonomous light entity, prismatic entity. It's simply working. It doesn't respond to anything. It makes the works, drops them down. The power of the public is to acquire the works. What I haven't touched on, because I just have been a little bit overwhelmed trying to explain this piece for the first time, is that 25% of all proceeds go to this beautiful entity in Ireland called Home Tree that are going to plant for each day about 33 trees, basically. So it's this way where you actually plant climate cooling trees by acquiring these works. So Freddie says, new work's amazing. I have a question about the flag. So I'm going to come back to this flag, 1 second. So Adam Kleinman says, what kind of a robot comes out on the equinoxes? It is a beautiful mirrored robot. I'm going to show it to you in a minute. So Durrell says, when you work on something that is highly technical and laborious for a long time, how do you keep up your engagement with that project? Are you motivated throughout the production of it? Do you have advice? Choose to work on a single project. I'm going to come back to Durrell. I'm going to just focus really on the project, on the questions about this project for now. So An anonymous attendee says, you mentioned specific sales as instruments for your career. How are you able to build these collector around your digital works? And Dan, again, as you have been exhibiting your digital artworks in public spaces or exhibition studies in the past, how are you imagining this piece being exhibited? Okay, I'm gonna go with Dan. Really, for me, like that is the key space for this piece. And I'm going to actually really lean into that for a second. This is, I would say, fundamentally a work for the phone. 1 minute, I'm just going to do it. Just give me just 1 second. So I'm going to do profile because I really want to lean into this. So field file. So, you know, I sit with people in a bar or in a restaurant, let's say, and they're interested in what I'm doing. And I have in my pocket this hyper machine, this thing, like this thing called a you know like an Android Samsung. And you know, I've been in the art world for, you know, I was selling works in Basel in 2006. You know, I've been in very, very, you know, powerful, wealthy homes where you come in and there's this incredible abstract expressionist paintings or whatever. But I'm really, really interested that, like, I take out my phone and I put it on the table and, you know, people can experience the work in that way. You know, the engine is rendered in the browser. So again, it's just loading, but like, I think that's interesting. You know, this space is interesting. Or, you know, that's actually really, it's public art for me. That's probably the thing I'm most interested in. Art, post, place, etc. So a really wonderful artist who I really admire, Lawrence Leck, who's in the question and answers, has a question, which is, John, hi, John, can you talk about how your thinking about game engines has evolved since you started? With this series, it seems like it's evolved to a point where game-like mechanics are an integral part of how they work, how the work gets assembled and discovered. So that is, that's super interesting. So it's very, very perceptive and interesting question. So, okay, so really, I came into the game engine with a 3D scan, really with this idea that I would have a sculpture photograph that I could turn in space, you know, that simple in a way, which challenged cinema. You know, it challenged cinema. It's like, you know, here we have a record of the world, which is three-dimensional in the engine. And that was really, really, really important for me. And so I worked in that framework for, you know, many, many, many years, making art, as it's known. But it was art which really had to become a thing. You know, it had to become a thing. Now, one of the reasons why the Beeple drop was so overwhelming for me, and when I say it was overwhelming, I actually really mean it was mentally overwhelming for me, is I suspect that tokenization allows artists to work at global scale in a completely unprecedented way. And by that, I mean, if we consider, let's say, currencies, maybe, or value, perhaps, maybe more, to be languages as such. Here we have a language, a language called a token, which allows you to do things like in the way that it was reserved really just for like, you know, kind of kings, you know, like you could kind of do that. Pack. I mean, Pack is fascinating artist. I mean, I bought 2 Pack cubes from that Sotheby's Nifty Gateway drop because I was like, this guy, value, scale, this is interesting. but it's media. Like Pac is obviously rendering, but he's dropping media. I'm not a media person. I'm a data person, always have been. So, Lawrence, try and answer your question a little bit more clearly. You're talking about game-like mechanics, an integral part of how the way work gets assembled and discovered. So here we have a robot, which is a data structure. It's like a fantastical data structure that is endeavoring to produce value, but that value is only manifested by a community, a blockchain community, who support the work, and in so doing are only art, which is valuable, but also plant trees, because we have a solar wheel mechanism here where a quarter of the proceeds goes to fund a social project, which is trees, a quarter goes to the platform, Fearfile, a quarter goes to me, and a quarter goes to production. So we've got this beautiful solar wheel to divide the proceeds. Yeah, so I think we have to have another session where everybody's on a Zoom and we can talk to each other more organically. But yeah, it's an interesting question, Lawrence. Werner has the producer, Diane, the work on the interplanetary filing system will be around about 200 megabytes, but we've included very high resolution material for the future. Typical data transfer, which includes content and engine sources, depending on the device you're viewing on, will be about 17 to 30 megabytes. So that's the approximate size. So just forgive me, I'm going to have to end this in like 10 minutes because I think, well, I actually don't. I can stay and chat to people if anybody wants. And you know what? I could actually put in a normal Zoom into the chat and everybody could just go to a normal Zoom if they wanted. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just load up Adam Plyman, who's an amazing, absolutely amazing and wonderful and brilliant curator in Trondheim. Wanted to know what the summer robot does, or what the solstice robot does. So I'm going to show you. Let me just share this 1 second. So it has no color. It's moved outside of the visible prism. Robot color mirrored, which you only get the robot color mirrored on one day of the year, which is the day that we dance. I just want to announce. And on that day, the sound also, I call it unhuman sound. The sound becomes inaudible that day. It's audible to wolves on that day, not to humans, which I rather love. So we are loading up our beautiful, beautiful, beautiful winter solstice. Here we go. I'm going to just glide the robot off so the robot gets working. So Chris Coleman says, will you have a site with an ongoing player of the full year? So someone could make a dedicated device showing it. So, okay, Chris, here's the thing. You can buy a month of these works if you wish. You can buy 24 tokens by 30 days. You can string them together using the Fearfile app, and then you can broadcast them on any device in your home. You can buy a day, 24. You can buy a week, 7 by 24. That we can do. That's in development. And that's Pace are going to really step in on that kind of stuff. They're going to offer their people a month. Yeah, they have collectors who would really be interested in a month. This is the robot. I love the mirrored robot. We will definitely, the devices have to be square, that's for sure. So we would like a square. Your question, though, is about the future of the robot. So Fearfile are offering 2 1-of-1s, which is our 2 generators. I mean, basically, the generators are 1-of-1s, 2 1-of-1s with 1 AP, which I will hold. I will not sell, but I will hold. They're offering the 1-of-1s to a number of major museums. And let's not forget that Fearfile commissioned Arifik Anadol to make Unsupervised, which was gifted to MoMA. So there is a kind of a history there. And we wish to continue in that history. And, I already have work in MoMA and Tate and SF MoMA and all that stuff. So it's not LACMA owned like 6 of my work. So it's not inconceivable. But across the year, we will have 8,760 works available in the world, basically, which you will see eventually under here. And what I would be very interested for people to do is I call it acquire, where they would acquire 1 day from each month or 1 hour from each month. So when you play it on your device, you could basically get tones from each day of the year, basically. By the way, Lauren Jones from Firrell says, if anybody has lingering questions about the exhibition or sale, please feel free to email her. She's Director of Collector Experiences on Firrell File. Her email is Lauren, Lauren, @firrellfile.com. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. This piece opens tomorrow. We begin. It is performing for a year. This robot will perform for a year. Every day, it will produce like 24 works, 24 tokenized works. And I have committed to Sean, who is the CEO, Sean Moss-Putz, who's the CEO of Firrell File, that I will accompany the work for the year. We want to get 12,000 trees into the ground in this beautiful lost temperate rainforest in Connemara with Matt Smith with Home Tree. And we're just going to find homes for these pieces, basically. So what else? So somebody said, 1 or 2 little last questions before I close this down. You mentioned specific sales as instrumental to your career. How were you able to build a base of collectors around your digital works? You know what? I didn't do it. Fundamentally, galleries picked me up. Ernst Hilger Gallery picked me up first, 2005. Then I was picked up by a wonderful gallery in New York, Simon Preston, 2008. Worked with Simon Preston for 10 years. Picked up by Thomas Dane in London. Worked with Thomas Dane for 10 years. And Pace, 2022. So I've been picked up by incredible galleries. And they have, for the most part, developed relationships with very visionary and incredible collectors like Bridget Evans, founder of VIA, is a major supporter of mine. Richard Massey, incredible collector who was on the board of MoMA for a long time. You have Ahmet Koshabik in Turkey, who has Borusan, incredible visionary collector. Now, this is a whole nother thing, but what's happened, like the digital art mile that happened in Basel, the barbarians are at the gate, in a weird way. The world kind of backed off from data-based artworks in the last, I don't know, things changed. The historic media paintings, Venice, the most recent, the Venice now, it is very nostalgic. It's curious. I mean, it has its own agenda, which is about the kind of global language, sort of like inclusion or, sort of rediscovery. Feels a little bit to me like the curator is the artist and he's sort of, brushing the show together from artists all over the world. That makes me a little bit uncomfortable. But there is, I would say, nearly no technology in Venice. Let's say not technology. There's not much of what we are doing here in Venice. The one exception in Venice is Pierre Huyghe and Pinot, but that's a whole nother thing. Listen, guys, I think we're kind of at the end. I just want to say thank you very, very, very much. I can answer one last question, if there is one last pressing question. Just to summarize, the sale is opening tomorrow if anybody wishes to buy the work. It will open, let me get this absolutely right. It will open, well, if you go to firrellfile.com, you'll find the dates and the times and those kinds of things. Each work is, it's 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. Eastern time. I think that's about 6 p.m., let's say, in Ireland. One last thing I forgot to say is embedded in the NFT, if you hit M, you can export a beautiful 3D model of the work, which you can 3D print, or you can use in virtual world building. You can also, and this is kind of important, and I did actually forgot to mention it. You can also, if you hit I, you can export a 4K image file of the work, and and if you hit G, you get instructions on how to print it. Let me just do this. Second, press play here. So you can do a 1 meter by 1 meter print of the work. So it's kind of, in a way, kind of amazing, like how much can be embedded in these WebGL files. And to end, I'm going to show you a very cute picture of me and Matt Smith with the oak trees that we're going to plant if you guys and the community come in and support this project. So with that, I'm going to say, any last questions? Let me double check. Def Beef says, thanks, John. Enjoyed the talk. Inspiring work. Congrats. So Def Beef, I'm such a big fan. I'm honored you're there. I need to tell you more about the generative sound because I think that's great. And Catherine, thank you very much. So anyway, I'm better. I normally do better lectures. This is kind of challenging for me. Everything is challenging for me tonight. So I just want to say thank you to everybody and good night. And we will do this. We'll do this again. Let's do this in real life somehow, though. Okay. Good luck. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.